Some of today's stories do contain some rather disturbing subject matter, and as always, viewer discretion is advised. And if you have a story you'd like to send my way, go to astheravendreams.com and just click that button to do so. And of course, thank you. Back when I got my first apartment, I was working at a retail store and I didn't make a lot of money. So, I tried to get a lot of cheap used stuff to furnish my place, which meant a lot of thrift store shopping and Craigslist scrolling. I found several great buys on there too. I got a practically new couch and chair, I got a kitchen set with pots and skillets, and even some window blinds. I had an older TV that my dad let me take from their place, since they didn't really use it. However, it had pretty bad screen burn. It went from being rarely used to being used daily, and it was an older tube TV, so it was bound to happen. So, I started browsing Craigslist again to see if I could find a cheap flat screen. Even if it was an older or not in the best condition one, I thought it was better than nothing. After passing up several ads that were asking way too much or were too far away, I finally found one that was within my range. The title said it was a 32-inch LG, and all they wanted for it was $50. They included a few pictures of it as well, and it appeared that there was nothing wrong with it, so I was trying to figure out what the catch was. I messaged them, inquiring about it, and their reasons made sense. They said they were moving out of state, so they were more so just trying to get rid of a bunch of stuff so that they didn't have to take it with them. I thought that this was a total win for me and started making plans to pick it up. I was planning to get it the next day because I still needed to get the cash, but they were adamant that I pick it up that day because they were going to be busy. Well, no problem. I just had to run over to the bank and drive out there, hopefully beating rush hour. I went and pulled out cash from an ATM to make it faster, but that meant that I would be giving them $60 instead of $50 since it couldn't do an odd amount. That was fine though, since I was still getting this TV for a steal at the time. I then set up my GPS to the address given, and I made my way there. The place was about 40 minutes away in a city that I had rarely been to, so I was going to be heavily relying on my GPS. When it said I had arrived, I had to go around the block as I had apparently driven right by it. By the third time, I finally slowed down and paid attention to the numbers on the surrounding houses to make sure I didn't miss it again. Then I realized that I was at the correct place, but why it was so easy to miss. It was because it was an abandoned house. There was a nice light blue house next to it, and then a smaller run-down home. One of the windows was boarded up, the front door looked like it was either missing or off the hinge because I couldn't see one. There was a driveway, but there were no cars in it, nor were there cars parked on the side of the road. It may sound stupid, but I was trying to be reasonable in thinking that they did say they were moving. Maybe they were clearing out and renovating this place and they were getting rid of the stuff left behind. Or maybe the place was condemned but squatters were living there, and maybe authorities caught them and told them they had to leave. I was pretty much trying to convince myself any way that I could that this was reasonable, until I saw someone walk over and stand in the doorway. It was a disheveled-looking woman. She had on some old beat-up-looking hoodie with her hair in a bun. She then turned to look back in the house, and then looked back and pointed at my car. And that's when I saw the guy approach the door. This guy looked a little more intimidating. He was easily twice my size, also wearing a hoodie, but he had it pulled up so that I could barely make out his face. The guy started walking down the steps, this whole time while he was looking in my direction. Finally, my gut told me that I needed to get the hell out of there, so I burned out. This didn't stop the guy from running towards my car as I drove away. I kept looking in my rear view the whole way home to make sure that I wasn't being followed. When I got back, I went to my computer and looked at the listing a little further. I zoomed in on one of the pictures, and the first thing that caught my attention was that it said the TV was an LG, yet the logo I saw had a V on it. So there wasn't even an LG TV. Then I noticed the window to the left of the TV. It was looking out to a street with a house across from it, and the porch railing had snow on it. This all occurred in May, so there was no snow in sight, and there were no houses across from the one that I went to. It was an apartment complex and a few small shops. The house also didn't have a porch, let alone a railing. I obviously had some tunnel vision occurring, and I didn't really inspect or notice anything in the pictures beyond the TV. I don't know if this was a picture they took elsewhere, or just one they took from the internet, or hell, maybe even another listing on Craigslist. I was disappointed that I didn't get the TV, but even more disappointed in myself for almost falling for what was obviously looking like a setup. I reported the listing and moved on. I ended up finding a TV at a local thrift store about a week or two later, and I pushed past the incident until I heard a story on the news. They were talking about safety and precautions to take when meeting up with strangers, like from Craigslist, and for sale offers and newspaper listings. Then they mentioned how there was another couple that was attacked after responding to an ad on Craigslist. They were meeting up to get something when they were robbed at gunpoint and one of them stole their car. Worse yet, their car had their small child in it. This event took place in the same city that I went to for the TV. I was terrified, and I thought that it could have easily been the same people that I saw, and if I was stupid enough to get out of the car, it could have been me. I know that they weren't too smart taking their child with them, let alone leaving them in the car, but they were all unharmed as they abandoned the car too. Probably because it came with a small child. Don't worry, this definitely steered me away from this kind of stuff. I still occasionally will get things listed on Nextdoor because at least I know the area, and typically only when I have one of my friends with me to help. Just in case. A while back, when I hit 19, I kind of ended up in a situation where I wanted to get out of the house and get my own place. Mostly because I was tired of living with my parents. It was more that I was tired of living by others' rules. I love my parents dearly. I really do. But they were also pretty strict with things, and it was definitely holding back my social life. I'm kind of a free spirit, and I like to be out socializing, and they wanted me home by 8 p.m. every night. And that's not me complaining. Their house, their rules and all, but it was enough to make me realize that I could just move out and get a cheap place nearby, keep them close, and make sure that I had my freedoms. So, that's what I decided I was going to do. After looking around for a while, I actually found a decent apartment that I could afford with my job that was less than 10 minutes away from where my parents lived. I went through all the motions to get the apartment, paid the deposit, and got it. Moving day came, my parents helped me get everything in and set up, and it was at that point that I realized I didn't have a whole lot, and definitely didn't have enough to fill a full apartment. My bedroom had my bed, my desk, my dresser, and my living room had a table with a TV on it, and that was pretty much it. I started talking to my dad about it and trying to figure out a list of things that I needed for the apartment, or what I could use, and my dad made a suggestion. I should look for cheap furniture on Craigslist. We talked about it for a bit, and he actually mentioned that if I found some stuff for the apartment on Craigslist that would work for me, and it wasn't terribly expensive, he would go in on half, and he would go with me to get it all. I thought this was a good idea. He had a truck, plus having him with me would make me feel a whole lot safer in dealing with strangers. I agreed. I told him that I would look online and get a hold of a few people over the next couple of weeks, and we would meet up when I had everything ready to go. So I did just that. I got on Craigslist and went through a number of postings, sent a few emails. Some responses I got were obvious scams or bots, so I ignored those. I had a few people that were interested in selling to me at first, but ended up disregarding me after I told them that it was going to be about 2 weeks before I could pick it up. Apparently, they weren't willing to wait to sell things, which is fine. After sifting and sending, I was actually able to get a few people that were willing to hold on to their items for me, so at least it wasn't a huge waste of time. Then I found a post that was, more or less, furniture, men's clothing, electronics, and more. I want it all gone, $200. I clicked through the pictures that this person had posted, and looking through it, they were selling a lot of things for such a low price. There were a number of furniture items, a couple game consoles, a decent desktop computer, and then clicking through it, I noticed that the men's clothing were mostly my size. I was over the moon, thinking I had hit the jackpot. Sure, it seemed a bit sketchy, but at the same time, if this was legit, I would have furnished my whole place and had a bunch of what would basically be luxury items for $200. The post had a phone number on it, so I immediately grabbed my cell phone and called the person. I mentioned the post, and I asked the woman that had answered why she was selling things for so cheap, because it did seem a bit odd. She then said that she and her boyfriend had split up, and that she hadn't seen him for over a week at this point, and all the items that she wanted gone were his. She even sent me a few pictures of herself in front of all the items while we were talking to prove that it was all real. I told her that I would give her the full $200 if she could just hold it for me for 2 days, as it was the Thursday before we were supposed to go get the items, and that I would take every single item off her hands that she wanted to sell. She actually agreed. She mentioned that I was the first person to call, and said that she would go ahead and mark it all as sold. Again, I was over the moon. I had just struck Craigslist gold. I called my dad and told him that this lady had a bunch of items that she wanted to get rid of for $200, and he seemed a bit concerned at first. I explained the situation, mentioned that she had sent me proof that it was all real, and then told him that it was all leftover from a bad breakup, and that the boyfriend hadn't come back for it. It took a bit of extra convincing, but I was able to finally get him to go with it. Saturday morning comes around, I text the woman mentioning that we would be there within the hour. She responds with, "Okay," and that was it. Not the best response to get, but it was enough for me. We headed to the house, and I was feeling even better about this transaction. The house was nice. Like, multi-story and well taken care of, so she could afford to just get rid of these things for way under retail value. Kind of nice. We pull into the driveway, walk up to the door, and I ring the doorbell. Nothing. No response. We wait for a little while, but after a couple of minutes with no response, I rang the doorbell again, and still no answer. I pulled up the messages between the two of us to make absolutely sure that this was the address, and it definitely was. I then decided to go ahead and give her a call. When I did, I could hear the phone ringing inside the house, like just on the other side of the door. I actually glanced over toward the window by the door and started looking inside. My dad chastised me at first, saying that I was being rude, but I had this really weird feeling that something was off. This was a nice house. The woman I spoke with was friendly, and seemed like she really was wanting to get rid of these items. And I was really wanting to get the stuff that she was selling. Then I realized why I was feeling off about this whole thing, and what it was that I was actually seeing. There was someone lying on the floor just inside the door. I mentioned it to my dad, saying that I think something had happened to the lady. He came over, looked in, and then he told me to call 911. I could tell by his tone that something was definitely wrong. I called them, and I tried to explain the situation to the person on the other end. It was a bit weird having to tell them that we had no idea who this person was, just that we were here to buy stuff, and then tell her that there was a person unconscious on the floor inside the house. It was just as awkward trying to explain it to the first cop that pulled up to the house as well, but I think they understood it better than the dispatcher did. Sure enough, the officer agreed that there was a person unconscious in the house, and decided that that was cause enough to kick the door in and call the medics. They obviously kept us out in the driveway, and we had to answer a lot of questions about why we were there, how we were connected to what was now a crime scene, which, after the medics showed up, the potential crime scene was confirmed to be a crime scene, and it was pretty clear how serious this really was. The long short of it, the woman was deceased, and based on how the officer explained it, it was a pretty obvious homicide. Thankfully, I had all the text messages and screenshots of the post to help and show that we weren't who killed her, but I was also able to explain to them that she had told me about her ex and how they had split up. They ended up taking my information and telling me that they would be in touch with me if they had any more questions, and we had to leave at that point. They never called me back, nor asked me to come in at all. I don't know if they ever ended up solving the case, but it definitely seemed like this was a situation where the ex-boyfriend came back and did the unthinkable. What makes it worse? Part of me still thinks that he may have done it because she was selling his stuff. And if I hadn't set up the meeting to pick it all up, he may not have done it. But if it weren't me, then someone else would have jumped on this deal. I don't let it tear me up, but it does bother me just a little bit. I did end up getting a couch for my living room from another seller and a few other things, but that was the only time that I ever used Craigslist. I know that this isn't a common thing to happen, but I didn't want to ever be put in a situation like that ever again. I have a fairly short and really weird story about one time when I used Craigslist to find a rental. At the time, I was living with my aunt and uncle, and I was working to find a new place. They weren't really pushy about me getting out of their home, but they were definitely wanting their space back. I appreciated them letting me stay, and I could take a hint, so I decided I would go and try to find my own place. Enter Craigslist, the world of weird people selling things at a low price. I decided that I would hop on to the internet's version of Kmart and see what was readily available nearby. On the plus side, I didn't have much to move. I could get it all out and in within a few hours. It was really just a bed, a dresser, and a fish tank. Everything else could fit in my duffel bag. Obviously, with only that going for me, I was looking for a small place to stay, like preferably a studio or something. After searching, talking to a bunch of weirdos, and blocking a few numbers, I found what looked to be a dream come true. A fully furnished, ready-to-move studio apartment that was in a decent part of town. I contacted the owner, and after a quick chat on the phone, We had set up the time for me to move in that following Monday, so long as I could wire him the deposit money by Friday before. At that time, it was Wednesday, so I had 2 days to get him the money. Thankfully, I had this plan for a little while, so I did have some cash set aside to get this all done. And he only wanted $500 for the deposit, which was going to be a bit more than half the rent per month. After discussing it with him and sending him the money via whichever transfer app we used, he had mentioned that the deposit would cover the first month. It was the middle of the month, so it was good with me, and that on the first of the month I would owe my normal $750. I was perfectly fine with this arrangement. Monday came around and I showed up with my truck filled with my few items and my clothes. When I got there, he was standing outside the studio apartment and we chatted about the location as he gave me a quick tour. It was a nice little place, perfect for me, and it had everything I could have ever wanted. I actually asked him about the furnishings, why he was renting it out with everything in it, and by everything I mean everything. There was a TV with a console connected to it, a stereo on the side of the room, and a bookshelf loaded with some pretty popular books. He then mentioned that he used to rent it as an Airbnb, which is why it was fully furnished, and that he was just tired of dealing with random people like that, so he wanted to rent it out to an actual, long-term tenant. It sounded like a really good arrangement to me at the time, so I thanked him, told him I would have the rent to him on the first of the month, signed his contract that he had typed up, and that was it. Well, that wasn't actually it. In fact, it was not it at all. I lived there for a total of 3 days, from Monday to Wednesday. On Wednesday night, I was sitting on the couch watching TV when I heard somebody talking out in the hallway of the apartments. I figured it was just the neighbors until I heard a key hit the lock, and then the door opened. I cannot express the awkward moments that followed. The couple that walked into the apartment looked at me like I was a robber. I was looking at them like they were breaking into my new home, and I think we all just kind of wanted to scream in terror. They asked who I was. I told them I was the tenant. I asked who they were, and they said they were the tenants. Long story short, and after a lot of loud talking and confusion, we figured out what happened. They were the real tenants. They had been out of town for a couple of weeks. I was actually not the tenant, and was basically sold an occupied unit by somebody that didn't have the rights to do so. I showed them my lease, and they showed me their much more official-looking lease. I showed them the messages and the email and the proof that I paid someone, and, well, they lived there, so they didn't really have to show me anything. What was worse? They did not know the guy that I had paid. The app that I paid him with said his name was something like Mario, and they really had no clue who the hell he was. We ended up getting the police involved so that we could make a report for the whole situation, because it was so messed up. In the end, I apologized for eating their food and using their furniture, and we agreed that I could leave my stuff there for a couple of days so that I could move back into my aunt and uncle's house. Mostly just my fish tank and dresser, as they were heavy and hard to move. Thankfully, they were incredibly polite with me, considering I was basically an intruder in their home. And thankfully they believed me and didn't resort to violence or anything like that. Unfortunately, I was never able to get a hold of the landlord, or I guess supposed landlord, to give him a piece of my mind. And I was out $500. I did keep in touch with a couple that actually lived there, and they never figured out how the guy got the key to their apartment, and they had the actual owner change the locks immediately. So, That's my weird story about the time that I rented a unit that wasn't really for rent. I ended up finding a place that was legit on Craigslist and moved in. And thankfully, there were no more late night surprises. I know this story wasn't terribly creepy per se, but it's still scary to think that this guy had the wherewithal to coordinate this while the couple was out of town. And worse yet, he had the key to their place without their knowledge. In the end, it's just one of those weird, creepy life lessons. A long time ago, I was a single mother with a young boy about 7 years old. I was doing my best to make ends meet with what little money I could scrape together working part-time. We didn't live in the best home, but I did everything I could to keep him happy, healthy, and fed. And I like to believe that I did a damn good job. I can say that nowadays things are much better. He's grown. I'm in a new marriage, and honestly, life is much happier. That said, there were times where I made mistakes, and where things got really rough. This is actually about an event where the unthinkable could have happened, and I really shouldn't have brought him with me. But I'm also kind of glad that I had. Though, I will say that my decisions weren't the worst part. I thought things were okay. I just ended up trusting someone a bit more than I should have. So, this was back when my son and I had just moved into a new apartment, when he was about 7 or 8 at the oldest. My husband and I had been divorced for about a year, and I was just really getting into the world after losing the house. There's a long story there that we won't get into. I was working part-time, so I didn't have a lot of money, but I had a family member that was helping me with the rent for the time being, so it wasn't a huge deal. However, after having lived with them for a year and then moving into my own apartment, I realized how much I was actually missing being self-sufficient. Then, I realized that one of the other big things I was missing was a vacuum cleaner. Vacuums are the one thing that you never really think about, and when you realize you don't have one, and then go look for a good one, you come to the conclusion that they are rather expensive. So, in a moment of genius, I went to Craigslist to see if I could find a cheap second-hand vacuum that was at least decent quality. In my mind, if I could find one that I could use and keep for a year at most, I would most likely be able to get the money together to get a really good one that was new. As such, I went for a mid-low price tier when searching. I ended up finding one that I liked, and the person only wanted $20 for the vacuum. I contacted him, everything seemed reasonable, and honestly I didn't even get any red flags when myself and this person sent messages back and forth about the whole thing. Everything about this transaction seemed like it was going to be ideal. Like, I would bring $20, he would give me a vacuum, and that would be it. Of course, one of the dumb decisions that I did make was being willing to meet this guy at his house instead of a public place. I will admit that I was a bit naive back then, and I hadn't done many transactions online, and I thought that this would just be a 5-minute thing. On that following Sunday, I started heading towards the address that he gave me, and I sent a message saying I was on my way. I pulled up to the house, and there was a man standing outside on the front porch, holding a glass of iced tea, just kind of watching me as I pulled up. I got out of the car, and my son followed pretty closely behind me. I thought about telling him to stay in the car, but I then thought that that would probably be the worst idea in a strange place. As I approached, the man on the porch asked if I was my name, and I said I was. He turned and opened the door and mentioned that I could step in the entryway and that he would go get the vacuum for me. We stepped just inside the door, and the man went over toward the other end of the house and into a bedroom. As he was out of my sight, he kind of started making small talk about the vacuum, saying it was still good, that he had just changed the belt on it, and he then also apologized that he had lost one of the attachments. After this, he, out of seemingly nowhere, asked me if I was a Christian. I mentioned that I was, and because I was taken aback, I asked why that was relevant. He followed it up with, "Oh, I was just asking. I'm sorry if I pulled you away from church to do this sale." He came out of the room with the vacuum and then continued, "I'm pretty devoted to my faith myself, so I know how important it is to go to church. Do you go to church?" It was a bit weird, but I thought that maybe this man was just really religious. So I mentioned that we hadn't lately, because we had just moved and hadn't found one in the area to attend. He smiled and nodded like he understood, and then it got weirder. He said, and this is a direct quote because I will never forget his words, "You know, God told me that you would be coming alone, and that if you did, I should take you as mine and run away into the desert." I just sort of stared at him like, "What the hell is wrong with you?" He laughed and then said, "But you didn't come alone, you came with your son." I think he was testing me, and that this was his way of making sure that I'm truly faithful. I was ready to run out of that house, but I was also afraid that, if I did, he would do something. After what was probably 2 or 3 minutes of panic-filled silence, he just kind of pushes the vacuum towards me and says, "Here, you can have it. I don't really need the money." I grabbed it and just sort of turned away to leave. The entire time we were walking towards my car, this man was seriously saying some prayer, one that I didn't actually know, so I don't think it was a real one from the Bible. I pulled away and I drove out of that neighborhood faster than I should have. Thankfully, my son just kind of thought that the guy was weird, and it didn't really click that we were in the presence of an absolute psychopath. I just kind of laughed and said, "Yeah, he was a bit weird, huh?" And thanked my lucky star that he decided that my son was a good reason to not hurt me. That was one of the only times I ever did any deals off of Craigslist, and it was the only time I ever did one at someone's house. After that, it was always store parking lots or other public places. I will also mention that I blocked his number after that, as he did try to text me one more time, asking if I wanted to go to his church. I responded with, "No thank you," and then blocked him. Thankfully, though, the vacuum did work. So I guess that's a plus. So this, my friends, was a collection of scary Craigslist stories. Though, reading them, this could have almost have been a first apartment horror stories video. It seems like Craigslist as a site is designed for people looking for secondhand items, obviously, but I feel like the more common, I almost said victim, the more common clientele that Craigslist would attract would be those going out into the world on their own for the first time, so I suppose it is entirely apropos that first apartment buyers, renters, or whatever would be looking at Craigslist. So anyways, good, scary stories. Hopefully you all enjoyed them. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, please consider subscribing. I would be eternally grateful. I do not know why I am splitting my sentences up weird in this outro, so please do not ask. Apparently it just happens. I stumbled over some words there earlier too, so I don't know. Just is what it is. Anyways, the other thing you can do is go down below the video where the comments are. Make sure you thumbs up other people that have commented, even if you don't comment, because that, one, helps the video, and two, helps culminate this loving community that we have attempted to grow, and we have successfully done so. So I don't know where I was going with that. And then, if you feel so bold, leave me a comment with your thoughts. Have you ever done a weird Craigslist deal? Have you ever had anything happen from Craigslist? I've only bought like 2 things off Craigslist. One was a TV. Nope, they were both TVs. And both were in public places. So I don't have any weird stories myself, thankfully. Kind of happy about that. But yeah. Anyways, friends, I hope you're all having a beautiful day. I hope the rest of the week treats you ever so well. And I hope that I do see you again on the next video. But until then, remember, you are loved, you are valid, you are important. Never let anyone tell you otherwise, and please, never forget it. With all that said, until I see you again, friends, much love, and sleep well.